The Maroon Bells, the most photographed place in all of Colorado and arguably the most beautiful. So when I was a young married man and I wanted to take my wife backpacking, naturally this place came to mind. We spent a wonderful 3 days backpacking through this area, starting at Maroon Lake and heading up towards Crater Lake and further to the base of the mountain. We had a wonderful time, but my wife was feeling a little bit sick, and when we got home, we found out there was a good reason for that. She was pregnant with our firstborn. Life changed pretty dramatically, and backpacking took a back seat to other more important things. Soon he was joined by his little brother, doubling our joy but putting backpacking even further away. And as the years went by, the boys got older, and finally came time to introduce them to the wonderful sport of backpacking. So I took them on their very first real backpacking trip.
Look at me!
Well, Matthew, right now we haven't really had any training before.
That's it. This is your first training.
This led to a serious backpacking trip in Colorado to see if they were ready to handle the mountains. This was followed by a 7-day trip in Montana that was the final culmination of my dream to go backpacking with my boys on a long backpacking trip. They enjoyed it so much that it became a tradition. Every 2 years, they would take their friends and we would go do the same trip. Over the years, this kept me hiking to stay in shape to keep up with these trips. So even though I was becoming older, I was doing more and more hiking. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking about the Maroon Bells. I knew it was a really serious hike that was for younger, really in shape people. And I think I was getting too old for that. About that time, a friend invited me to go backpacking with him. What I didn't realize is that he was going to do a serious hike that was much beyond what I thought I was capable of. But I did it, and I realized I was capable of a lot more than I thought I was. This got me thinking, would it be possible for me to actually do my dream of doing the 4-pass loop by the Maroon Bells? 4-pass loop starts at the Maroon Bells, then travels over 4 12,500-foot peaks before returning to the starting point. This is a hike that had intimidated me as a young man, and now I was thinking about doing it in my mid-60s. Just off the 4-pass loop, there's a little lake called Geneva Lake that's accessible from the town of Crystal, so I thought I could try this to start out and see how it went. I convinced my friends to join me on this little exploration. So after hiking 8 miles of Jeep trails, we finally came to a parking lot that was the Geneva Lake trailhead. From this parking lot, it was a steep and difficult rise to get to Geneva Lake, and we finally arrived, but not after being completely and totally exhausted. But after a good night's sleep, it was all worth it, as we were rewarded with one of the most fantastic views I'd ever experienced in my life. This only redoubled my resolve to actually do the entire 4-pass loop. I believe now that I was capable of it, I just needed to come up with a good plan. Most young people in good shape do the 4-pass loop in 3 or maybe 4 days. I was not a young person, so a man's got to know his limitations. I figured it would take me 5 days of hiking and an extra rest day in the middle to make this loop possible. However, this creates another problem. If I was going to take 6 days to hike this loop, that meant 6 days worth of food. I did not want to be going over these passes carrying that much food weight. So after thinking about it, I came up with a solution. The Jeep trail that we'd hiked up to had a parking lot right by Geneva Lake, which was right off the main trail. If before we started the hike, we drove a Jeep up the Jeep trail that had resupplies in it, we could park it in the parking lot and then take a little deviation from the trip and go by the Geneva Lake trailhead to the parking lot to get a resupply. Restocked with food, we'd just head up to Geneva Lake where we take our rest day, and after eating the food that day, we're only left with 2 days of food to take on the remaining 2 passes. This way, we only have to have 2 days of food going over any pass. That seemed more doable. In order to pull this plan off, I had to find 2 friends with Jeeps, one with the resupplies that we would leave in the parking lot, and the other to take us back out again. This was logistically complicated, but it made the trip seem so much more doable to know that we were only taking 2 days of food up any pass. July 17th, 2022. 4 brave souls met in the little town of Marble to implement my crazy plan of achieving my dream. We headed out with 2 4-wheel drive vehicles that we hoped were capable of handling the rough jeep trails ahead. From the town of Marble, you head up into the mountains, but soon come to a fork in the road. Sheep Mountain has 2 paths that go around it. You can either go to the bottom side and follow the creek through Crystal, which is what we did when we backpacked the first time last year, or you can take the high road and go on the other side of the mountain and end up at the same place. That's what we chose to do this time. This road gets pretty rough, so buckle up and hang on for the ride. At the start it didn't seem too bad, but not too far in things started to get a little sketchy, like, dude, did you know there's a big drop off over here? Can you get a little further away from the edge, you know?
Yes.
We also ran into several other vehicles that were more appropriate for this trail, but it was always a little dicey as it was obviously a one-way trail and somebody had to find a way to get around. Eventually, we broke into more open scenery, and it started looking really good. It wasn't just driving through a bunch more trees. Then we started getting a little more serious uphill. It was becoming clear with the switchbacks and the altitude we were gaining that we were getting higher up into the mountains. I'll admit, I was getting a little tired of all this and getting ready to get to our parking spot. And then we came around the corner and started to see some real beautiful views. In fact, the further we went, the better they got, and we forgot all about the danger. It was just breathtaking.
Beautiful.
Left, yep. Very good.
Okay, that was one to get your adrenaline going. From this point on, it was pretty much downhill as we were coming back down the mountain to find the parking spot where we would leave the Jeep with our resupply. We finally found the parking lot and parked one of the Jeeps with everything we would need when we came by a few days later. With that done, we all got into the remaining vehicle and headed around the mountain the bottom way. After all the almost falling over the edge high mountain cliffs that we'd just taken, we thought the lower road would be a little safer. Unfortunately, it had challenges of its own.
You'll have to turn further. Yeah. More, even more. Okay, now straighten out, straighten out, yeah. Straighten out more. Wow.
Now that felt funny.
That was funny.
It was tricky, but we finally made it back. We later talked to some people who drive in this area regularly, and they were just shocked that we were able to make this trip in the vehicle we had.
Good job.
It was quite a feat, evidently, and they were very impressed. We managed to make it to Crystal and all the way back to Marble without further incident. From there, we drove up through Aspen and to a little campground just outside of Aspen called, appropriately, Difficult Campground. There we would spend our night before waking up the next day to continue our adventure. Everything was in place now.